Hey everyone, my name is Amanda and I'm the Fun Size Reader, and today I want to talk to you about Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I chose Powerless for the March of 2024 Fun Size Book Club. If you're watching this video for book club with me chatting alongside, I'm so sorry that I had to postpone last week's conversation, but I'm hoping that you made it this week if you wanted to be here. If you weren't able to make it, hopefully you are watching this on your own time. Be sure to leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you enjoyed the book. Powerless is a young adult new release in the fantasy romance genre, and it is actually an indie book that turned traditionally published. There was a lot of hype about this book on social media over the past few years. Lauren ended up getting picked up by a traditional publisher, and this book was released earlier in the year, I believe. So I picked it because it's been sitting on my shelf. Obviously, I have the indie published copy. I do not have the trad published copy, but it's been sitting on my shelf for a very long time. And I was like, I finally just want to get to it. I want to read it. And so here we are for book club. Everything about the description of this book called my name. Like, it was things that I enjoy in a fantasy romance book. It is about a girl named Peyton, and she is an ordinary. She is a person without any powers, living in a society where there are elites, and I can't remember what they call the lesser powerful people, but basically she pretends to be one of those because the king and the king's enforcer, who is his son, try to rid the country of the ordinaries because of this disease, plague, something from the ordinaries, which is supposedly diminishing the powers of the elites. So if you are ordinary, you basically get killed by the enforcer, whose name is Kai. So Peyton has pretended her entire life that she is a psychic or has psychic powers that her father taught her to emulate and learn how to pick up on details before he was killed by the king. Peyton lives in the slums called the Loot, and one day she's walking through and robs someone who turns out to be the prince enforcer. But when he gets into trouble and she ends up saving him, she gets noticed by the kingdom and is put in something called the trials, which is like a competition to prove that you are the best of everyone participating, and the winner gets a large sum of money. The problem is that she is ordinary, she's faking all of her powers, and everybody else that she's competing against is elite, including Kai, the enforcer, the prince that she saved. I gave this book 3 stars. Now, I will be the first person to say I read both young adult and adult books. I feel like my scales for them, while they mean the same thing, like my number of stars mean the same thing, I'm a little bit more lenient on things with young adult. You give a little bit more allowance for things not being as put together. It's for young adult audiences. So it's not going to be extravagant world building. It's not going to be things that we expect in an adult novel. So while my star ratings are the same, I'm a little more lenient with what I'll allow for that star rating. And still most of it goes on feel, right? I rate on feel. So with this one, I had to keep reminding myself that it was YA. One of the reasons why I had to keep reminding myself was because the look of the book, I think, is marketed as a new adult fantasy. The cover kind of screams the style that these new adult books are. I don't know what specific about it makes me feel that way. That, I think, is a little bit of a hindrance. I think that sometimes visually you can expect it to be older, but I didn't necessarily feel that it was older. So I gave it 3 stars. It was good. I will probably continue with the series. The second book comes out this summer. I think I already have it pre-ordered because I knew I was going to read this one. So I ordered it when it was on sale, like Barnes & Noble's hardcover sale. So I liked it. It was good. It did feel YA to me, a lot more so than some other YA books have felt. I think the reason for that is because there was such a focus on banter. But I'll get into that in a second. Let me just finish with the, ratings things that I always do. Spice rating, because it is YA, there's no spice. There's absolutely none. It's a 0, so nothing to worry about. There's a lot of banter. There's a lot of physical touching, but there's no spice. There's some innuendo and like jokes and things like that, but nothing physical. Now, I have no idea if that is planning to be changed in future books. I would assume because this is classified as YA that it's not, but I have no idea. So on the lines of there's lots of banter and no spice, I read romances. That's all I read. I read contemporary and fantasy romance. If there's not romance in a book, I tend to not pick it up as quickly as I pick up a romance book. Okay, I read things that are not romances, but I lean towards romance mainly. Okay, this book felt like it had a lot of romance and it wasn't even really romance. It was just like situations to push the main characters together and get them touching to try to build tension, but never actually make anything happen. And for me, an avid romance reader, I just kind of felt like it got old. There was too much. Like, I feel like it could have been cut way down. There were so many scenes of them just talking and bantering and touching and being close to each other, and then talking and bantering and touching and being close. And then, oh, we're fighting and we're bantering, but we're also touching. I felt like that's all it was. And as a reader, especially like if you're going to have that much touching in a book, it made me feel like, well, this should have been adult because all of the physical touching should have led somewhere. I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but just because it was so much, that's what I kept thinking in my head. I was like, they're literally constantly hands all over each other. This has to escalate at some point. And it never did. They never even kissed. Like, it was just very interesting. I also felt along those lines, like there was a scene specifically where they were like hand-to-hand combat fighting. That was the scene that I was talking about where there was some like innuendo and jokes. From being an adult romance reader, an adult fantasy romance reader, when there's those kinds of jokes, when there's physical contact and like rolling around and pinning people down and like fighting and training, a reader comes to expect that if you're making sexual jokes during those scenes, that is going to escalate to adult behaviors later in the romance. Like, that's expected, but it didn't. So like, it felt very weird to have that in there as a YA book when there was no escalation. Like, does that make sense? It just felt a little off for me. And there was way too much touching. For no escalation, too much touching. And it just wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't very romancy to me. It was just, how much can we banter and say we hate each other, but nothing ever really happens and moves and changes. Like, we just keep enemies-ing, but like not really enemies, because it's not really enemies to lovers. That was my observation of like the romance part of it. And I think because of that, because there was so much focus on the banter and the touching, that's what made it feel very young to me. I put myself back at like when I was in high school reading Twilight, and all you wanted to happen was like the characters to touch, right? Like and I just felt like it was very focused on that, and it made it feel more YA to me. Another thing, and like I said, I thought the book was good. It was entertaining and I did read it. But, and I don't say this in a negative way at all, but just my observation, to me, it read like Hunger Games fan fiction. And even more than just Hunger Games fan fiction, it read like a mixture of Hunger Games and Red Queen fan fiction. Did anybody else get that? I know one person did because I've actually talked to her about it already. That's just what it felt like to me. And as somebody who was in the Hunger Games generation, like read the book when it came out, like waited for the movies, all of that. Like that was my generation. Reading this, it just felt a little bit lackluster. Like for being probably inspired by the Hunger Games, I can imagine that. It just felt a little, I don't want to say not good enough, but like it just felt like it was trying to be that, but how can anybody be the Hunger Games, right? Like how can anybody be the Hunger Games? I also thought that the violence in the book should have been adult. And I think that's another thing with like what was happening with the romance and the vibes that gave me. And then all of the very explicitly described violence. It was too violent to be YA. And it was like weirdly young romancy to be adult. So I was just like getting very off mixes as I was reading this. I wanted there to be a little bit more plot. Like I said, way too much focus on the forcing the characters together and forcing them close together. I did like the concept, but again, I think that is because it reminded me of Hunger Games and Red Queen meshed together. Things that I'm specifically talking about when I say Hunger Games fan fiction is like the trials is like the games. There is a poor girl living in this desolate place who gets randomly chosen to be part of the games, which both of those things also happen in Red Queen, kind of. You have this evil king character who is basically trying to get the main character killed because she's a threat to him, President Snow. And then you have the interviews and the things to make people like you and vote for you and want to support you. Like that was all part of the Hunger Games too. So it was just, the concept was way too similar for me not to compare the two. And I hate doing that, but also like if you're going to write something very, very similar to something that's insanely popular, that's going to happen just naturally. I do it when people write something way too similar to Sarah J. Maas too. Like it just happens. I wanted to talk about Adina. I think that's how you say her name. I don't really know. I liked her as a character, Prim. They weren't related, sure. Adina was Prim. The Adina storyline was, I don't want to say odd, but maybe awkward is a better word. Like you knew she cared for her and they were all each other had and they lived together and blah, blah, blah. But then she just like forgot about her. As soon as she was in the castle and she was with the boys, like she literally just was not mentioned for freaking ever until it was convenient to bring her back into the story to use her in the end, which I just didn't feel as strongly about because I was like, she literally has not thought about her, not mentioned her, literally nothing for like a large chunk of the story. And then all of a sudden she's back. And it just felt a little too, it just felt not fully fleshed out to me. It felt too convenient. We had to add her back into the story to remind us about her so that we could kill her in the end, which I didn't really love. I thought there were a lot of different ways that ending could go. As I was reading it, and I do this often, right? You try to predict what's going to happen as you're reading it. But as I was reading it, I pictured different endings. Obviously, you know, the maze that they're going through at the end, they had to kill whoever was there. Okay. And what I thought was going to happen, because obviously like there's this whole rebellion thing. They're going to come through the, floor again, similar to the rebels breaking into the last of the games in Catching Fire. Anyways, I expected that the king was going to have the maze manipulated so that Kai and Hayden were going to get there at the same time. And they were going to be shut into the maze. And basically it was supposed to be a fight to the death, right? He wanted Kai to be the one to kill Payton. And because of Kai's feelings and his inability to harm her, he wouldn't have done it. And the rebels would have shown up and they would have basically broken away. And then you would have had Kai, who is now the king's enforcer, the prince, who is in with the rebels because of his feelings and relationship with her, who is an ordinary, that he finally realizes this. And then it's basically brother against brother with this girl in the middle, because we know that the crown prince, I can't remember his name, he had feelings for her also. So like, that's what I anticipated happening. That's, as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, he's going to pit them against each other. He's going to want Kai to kill her. Kai's never said no to his dad that he knows of, and he's not going to be able to do it. Like, that's going to be the final task, right? So then when it turned out to be Adina, and then it was the other purple-haired girl, I can't remember her name either, that ended up shooting her with a bow and arrow and killing Adina, and then winning the games. And then, so then they both lost, but Adina was, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting that. And then the other part that I just did not really click with was the fact that we went the whole book with her remembering her father's death a certain way, remembering the king, remembering the green eyes, remembering all of these specific features and whatever. And then randomly she's told, oh, it was actually Kai. And then she just her memory is completely changed. And now everything about it is different. She's like, oh my gosh, it was Kai that killed my father. Like, I just didn't like that ending. I didn't like that. What I wanted, again, with what I wanted to have happen, what I wanted to have happen was I wanted it to I think his name's Kit. I wanted it to be Kit that actually killed her father, because throughout the entire book, Kit had this like war with himself of not being useful, not being able to go do anything, not being anything but a trophy to sit on the wall on the shelf and take over as the king later. And so what I wanted it to be was I wanted it to actually be Kit that killed her father, as a way to try to go out and prove to himself that he could be useful and he could do what Kai did and does. And like, I wanted it to be that. That I think would have been such a wrench in like the characters and the story and her feelings towards their friendship and all of that. Again, like I didn't write the story, so I can't get it, but that's what I expected. That's what I really expected. If you do like my little predictions and think that my story would have been awesome, I am writing a book. So, just stay tuned and hopefully it'll be good and you'll like that. This is part of the reason why I make up the endings in my head and of what I would do with how the book has gone this far. Like, this is what I would do, Stay tuned. But anyways, back to the book. But anyways, I know this might have sounded like a very negative review, but it wasn't negative. If the romance would have been cut down a little bit, not toned down, just cut down, and the plot would have been amped up a little bit, I feel like I could have given this book 5 stars. It had the elements that I look for. It was good. I didn't love it, but also that doesn't mean that I won't love the next book, right? So I definitely think I'm going to keep reading the series. I do think that it is YA, just, put a little asterisk on the violence stuff, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I read it. I didn't read it slowly either. It was entertaining. It kept me engaged, besides the, having too much of the banter, too much of the touching. Again, I read romance, so that's saying something. But I hope you all loved it. I really hope you do. I hope you loved it enough to read the next book, which I believe is coming out this summer. Thanks for reading along with me this month. Don't forget to stay tuned to find out what we are reading for the month of April. If you like fantasy and romance books, I post reviews on my channel weekly, so make sure to click like and subscribe if you want to be notified when I post a video. Thank you everyone for joining Fun Size Book Club this month. I'll see you guys next time.